Hi, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Vault. I'm here. My name is Jesse Store. Also here is Alex Garcia, and today we're going to be talking about chest and shoulders. We're going to be going over some cues that maybe you could just use in your next training session. Blah blah blah. But we just really want to have a conversation, kind of figure out what each other are doing right now, what things might work for us, and then what things y'all can kind of take away in your own training. So, Alex, what do you
Yeah.
say we start out with? Maybe bench
Well,
press?
yeah, I think bench is really important to address because I feel like it's something that is universally associated with chest. And, you know, I think that it's really important to understand what movements work best for you. I think that bench press is definitely one of those movements a lot of people should learn. Uh, do you feel like more people should learn the bench press?
Yes, I mean I feel like you should definitely understand.
Yeah, see,
I
I
only
don't
reason
know.
like it's because
I don't know. Yeah.
it's like yeah, I feel like the bench press is like a benchmark. Me personally, I think
Hmm.
like the incline bench press is something that most people need in their training, whether it's going to be with the barbell or dumbbells. Like you need some type of
Hmm.
incline press. That's the best way to build the upper chest, in my opinion.
Hmm.
But maybe you don't have to do flat bench, barbell bench press like a traditional conventional bench
Yeah.
press. But I think some type of press you got to be doing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think that recently, with the way that I have like gotten more into bodybuilding, I've noticed that it really pays to hit incline. It really does. And I think that I I I am happy to have the flat bench foundation because I think that it helped me with my incline press, but at the same time, nothing is going to help my incline press more than incline pressing. And I've just noticed that the more I've done it, the more my chest has just shown overall.
Yeah.
And recently I've just been noticing Sam Sulik just all over my damn social media, man. That dude is just all over social media right now. And he is, like I was watching one of his snips the other day, and he was talking about like I've never decline pressed, never programmed it. I haven't hit flat bench in like forever, and like I only incline press like that. And I think that that's interesting because he says one of his reasons behind it is like, well, everybody's lacking in their upper chest. And it's like, most of the time when I think of a fully developed chest, the upper chest is always involved. Like, oh, when I see somebody who has like an impressive chest, I'm like, they've got a shelf. They could stack a can on top of their chest.
Hmm.
Like where do you get that from? The incline chest press, right?
Yeah.
Like any type of incline motion. Um, but I don't know. I think that there's got to be some level of I like barbell. I have to say I do like barbell because I think that it is better overall for developing strength, dynamic strength. But in terms of muscle building, you can make several arguments for dumbbells, I think, honestly, with especially on incline, getting the
I think the
stretch and
Yeah, I think the trade-off there is like you can load up a barbell more with more weight
yes,
essentially because
it's
you're not worrying
loadable.
about the stabilization aspect of the dumbbells, but you can go through a deeper range of motion using dumbbells because the bar is not going to be hitting your chest. You can go a little bit deeper and keep the chest real high. So that's why
Yeah.
personally for me, I like using dumbbells. I'm not going to
Hmm.
go, as heavy as I possibly can or as heavy as I would maybe with a barbell. But that's not really normally how I train anyways. And not
Hmm.
like I'm going for like 3 to 5 reps. So I might go
Right.
for 6 to 8 and whatever's heavy for that. But again, that weight's not going to be as heavy for the dumbbells as it is for the barbell, and that's okay. I mean, that's why there's trade offs with everything. So
Yeah, I mean, like, I think, another really big thing that a lot of people overdo with, and this is something I think that's one of the reasons why barbell presses I think are overrated for a lot of people is like, Mike Israetel talks about, controlling the eccentric, having a good stretch at the bottom, like having a pause at the bottom, and making sure that you're, keeping your elbows tucked so you get the stretch on the chest. And I've just noticed that it's a lot easier to get that type of thing done with a dumbbell than a barbell. However, what I will say too is that for the longest time, I was very anti Smith machine until I realized that Smith machine, you can kind of get somewhat of the best of both worlds and in a lot of ways because you can take away that unstable environment and increase your ability, and then you go back to dumbbells, with a little bit more strength. I find I can train closer to failure with a Smith machine than I can with like the free weights. And I think that that's a barbell movement. So I definitely find that like massively stabilizing against a barbell versus two dumbbells, it just has like more benefits for strength, but you can get that muscle building aspect because with the machine you can just control that eccentric a lot better because that path is just very fixed and very predictable. I just have found the different variations to all have their pros and cons, really.
Yeah, I mean,
um
yeah, there's merit definitely everywhere. I just think with the Smith machine, the toughest thing is the
Shoulder.
shoulder doesn't move in the way that it's necessarily supposed to when you're
Hmm.
locked in place like that. So personally, for me, like a flat bench press doesn't feel great on my shoulder. Incline bench press doesn't even really feel great. I at least have to cut the range of motion a little bit short. But when I do
Hmm.
dumbbells, it feels great. I have no problems at all. So,
Yeah.
and even I would argue maybe if I went with, just a regular barbell, that still feels a little bit better to me than a Smith machine for a press
Hmm.
specifically for the chest. But again, I mean, like you said, everything has its merit, everything has its place. But what are some specific cues for you? Any even like weird cues that you've come up with yourself in the gym that work well for clients, or that you usually use every time that you press? Because I think whether it be a
um
bench press or a dumbbell bench press or even like a cable press, there's probably some universal cues that you use, when you press usually. So what are some of those things?
Well, I would definitely say, especially as I'm learning and as I'm teaching, well, like for teaching, I actually am really big on just having a pause at the bottom. I think that like just holding it there
Taking the
at the
momentum
bottom.
out.
Yes, like no momentum. I think learning to train with no momentum is going to actually stimulate a lot more growth, and it's just safer. So
Mm-hmm.
I always say hit a pause at the bottom, even if it means we don't get to do a load that we know that we can do. I would rather take the load down and work on it like that, and progressively overload that form because it's safer and it's more than likely going to increase the muscle fiber recruitment to the area, which I don't mind. Like sometimes, obviously, like strength is still like a focus of a program, and I'll still implement the pause, like because I still think like if you want to develop absolute strength, you have to do things like that. So I'm just big on developing absolute strength overall. So I feel like that pause at the bottom and you know tempo too. I mean, I don't really have any unique cues. I don't think of these cues as unique. I feel like some people would probably be like, oh, I've heard that before, but
So
like
you don't
really
have any like cues that help you or help other clients specifically, maybe just feel the
el-
chest more in the press or how.
elbows tucked for sure. I just think rather than I have 45-degree angle with the dumbbells. I don't want, if I'm doing dumbbells for sure, like I don't want to flare my shoulders back too much because then I just feel like I'm getting a lot of delts. And that's the main thing I've found is that
Even
you
on
just
an
have
on
to
an
be,
incline press?
yes,
Really?
especially on the incline
That's
press.
interesting because for me, I find that I especially if I keep so the number one thing I think about when I'm on a press is, where am I, right? Like if I'm on a flat
Hmm.
bench, then yeah, I'm not gonna have my elbows this wide. But if I'm on an
Hmm.
incline bench and my elbow is stacked with my wrist
Hmm.
in this position, then I'm perfectly fine doing this because I'm gonna really get a really deep stretch and then be able to keep the
Yeah.
tension high. And what I'll even do on top of that, another little cue is I'll tell people to slightly push like towards the hairline essentially. So instead of me just going straight up, I'm going even
Hmm.
more up of an incline. And even that little cue, just going maybe like a quarter of an inch back help me engage with the chest a little bit more. So on top of
Oh.
like maybe just doing that and adding that little bit back, the only other thing I'll kind of focus on is trying to like force my elbows in as I'm
Hmm.
actually pressing the weight up because that'll give me a really good squeeze, especially at the top.
Hmm.
So that's
Yes.
that's kind of something I think about even while I'm in the stretches. I'm thinking elbows in as I press this weight up, and that gives me a really good contraction, especially as I go up through the range of motion.
Yeah, I think it depends too, like on your goals, but like I've just noticed too that just to minimize any type of shoulder ailments of any kind. I just noticed that shoulders tend to be a problem area for a lot of people.
For
So
sure.
I'm more of the mindset like, tuck your elbows at least a little bit. I think too I like to teach elbows tucked because I want them to be aware of when they start to move back like this, because what
Mhm.
happens too is like if you start to fail, there's also that tendency to want to, so
Mhm.
like, but when it's here, it's like a much more stable position. And I've just found too that, when you get all the way down here, you're still getting a pretty decent stretch on the chest,
Oh no, you
even
definitely
if you
are.
don't,
I just
even if
think
you
I
don't
just
necessarily do elbows flared back like that. But I can see where you're coming from because of the way that it lines up
Yeah,
with,
just from even from a stability standpoint, the main thing I'm focused on, at least from even just helping the shoulders, is my wrist stacked on top of my elbow. If
yes,
that happens,
that's
then
huge.
then I'm then
That's the
I'm
biggest
good.
thing.
Like the shoulder is usually going to be good because
Yeah.
the dumbbell is pretty stable. So it doesn't matter if I'm all the way down here pressing, I'm good. It doesn't matter
Yes.
if I'm all the way up here. Really, I should be good for the most part. Yeah, you're going to use a little shoulder stability here because it's slightly stretched. Even being up here,
Yes.
but
Hmm.
I mean, it is what it is. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think there's, obviously different angles you can hit on the chest. Obviously, we're using different types of grips and stuff. So there's
Yeah. I was
multiple
gonna
ways to
say there's a lot of nuance there.
a lot,
I would say
obviously.
honestly, like you could really do both. I've seen a lot of bodybuilders go straight up like this, and their
Yeah.
upper chest looks insane. Like, and I would say you probably are going to see a little bit more clavicular stimulation there. If you're going up here. So
Hmm.
I mean, I also have found that you got great hammer strength machines for stuff like that too.
Hmm.
So I'm also not huge on. I could load that range of motion with something a little safer, because I feel like dumbbells
Oh,
are
for sure.
actually, they're two unstable objects. So, it can be challenging, and like I don't know. That's something for me too. Like I just think about the inherent risk. And, I want to go heavy on dumbbells, but I've just noticed too that like it's easy to drop a dumbbell or hold the dumbbell a wrong way or something like
That's
that.
that's probably where we
So,
differ then too, because especially when I'm training or if I'm training clients, like I'm gonna go heavy for what I believe is gonna challenge me for the reps I need to get. Same thing with
mhm,
clients, but I'll always number one, like right when I see that, I'm like, look, you need to, slow this down. You need to do this. And if a client says
yep,
I can't do that, then okay, then you're dropping the weight. Then like drop the weight 5 pounds, drop it 10 pounds, whatever you got to do. But don't
yep,
don't end up ego lifting or feeling like you got to lift heavier weight than you can actually control. At that point, what are we doing? So,
right.
um, cool. Well, what about let's switch over. We'll stay on chest real quick, but like a chest fly, like any type of like actual
Yes, I was
shoulder
just about to
adduction
talk.
exercise. What's maybe a couple cues there or things that you think either just like biomechanically people need to be thinking about when they're doing this movement? Like how should you be thinking about executing this movement?
Well, I would say one of the biggest things is making sure that you're using your levers correctly. Like sometimes I've noticed people do flies and they kind of go with their elbows fully bent.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the more you'd actually want to try to keep those arms open as much as you can. So rather than being
Mm-hmm.
like here, you're definitely going to feel a lot more of a stretch on the chest. That may mean you need to go a little bit lighter,
Mm-hmm.
but the goal should also be too to, like, rather than keeping your shoulders up, you don't want to shrug your shoulders up, keeping those shoulder blades
Mm-hmm.
retracted so that the chest is really getting that full stretch. And then as you bring the weight up, I like to always tell people like you're just hugging a tree, like you're bringing it
Yep.
around. And then as you come up towards the top, you want to extend and protract your shoulders to get that last little squeeze on the
Mm-hmm.
chest. And those are some of the cues that I just think about is like towards the top, I'm like squeeze, extend, and then another thing, and this is something that is just a common theme with building muscle is that stimulus on the eccentric. You want to think about slowly controlling that stretch all the way down. And I think that a lot of people tend to just try to rep it out too much, and they're not really getting enough. They're not really milking each rep and getting the most
Mm-hmm.
out of each rep. It's not like you have to go like 5 seconds on the way down. Like 2 to 3 seconds is probably good. Um, you could probably look up some of these different exercises and their amplitudes, like what you know tempo that you would want to use. Some of them don't necessarily need as long of a tempo as you would think. And I would say the same probably for chest. 2 to 3 seconds on the way down on the eccentric. It's just going to help you feel it more. I think that's a good way to just think about cueing it is like as you come down, you don't want to just like put that
Yeah.
stress on the joints like that either. So I
Mm-hmm.
find that it's just a better way to train. Now, like, let me ask you, like, what do you think is the best chest fly exercise for a beginner? if they were wanting to get into chest flies, what do you think would help them make the most gains in the shortest amount of time, but also be accessible enough for them that they could get good at it pretty quickly?
I would usually say cable fly, but I think pec deck, if you have a pec deck machine, is the
Yeah.
best because it's I mean, you can't mess it up as much as a cable fly. And the biggest thing there is just the right seat positioning. Um, but yeah, probably cable fly. And I think even like a cue I would give people there still is making it as simple as possible. I think a lot of times when we do movements, if we know even where to put the pressure, and what I mean by that is, let's say like on a cable fly, instead of me thinking, oh, I need to get my arms in, or oh, I need to just bring it in no matter what. So that means either rounding too much here or bending too
Mm-hmm.
much here. If you just think keep arms, relatively wide, relatively straight, small bend and or a soft bend in the elbow, just so you can protect the elbow. But then all I'm thinking is just putting pressure on the inside of the hand. I'm just really just trying to close the hands and, like you said,
Yep.
basically just give somebody a big old hug. That's really all you're trying to do. When
Mm-hmm.
you just think about putting the pressure on the inside of the hands, you really feel the chest engage in a way that and that's a small cue I give people, and automatically you're like, oh shit, like I feel that like way more than trying to sit here and like
Yes.
bear hug it, or not bear hug it, but sit here and try to like muscle it almost and bring it in.
Mm-hmm.
You take a lot of that tension and put it on the forearms too. So
Yes.
if you keep it simple, even on the peg deck, and just leave the hands wide open, because you don't have to worry about it falling back. You're on a machine,
Mm-hmm.
and you just think about putting the pressure right on the hands and just squeezing together. And like you said, you can do one or two things, because there's one way, especially on the cable, when you can actually lean into it a little bit more. You can do it on the peg deck too, just
Mm-hmm.
not as freely. But if you actually lean into that stretch a little bit more, we don't want to go so far back that the shoulder is in a bad position now, but going back where we feel a good stretch and we actually lean into it a little bit, and then as you actually contract, you lean back a little bit, but kind of keep that chest out, and you can even reach
Yeah.
out a little bit with that too. But just that little bit of leaning into it and then
Mm-hmm.
leaning back on the actual contraction is
Let me
another
ask
thing that
you.
gives you a little bit extra too.
I've seen this before. Like, I want to see, like, hear what you think about it. What do you think about people putting a foam roller behind their back to try to
To try
get
to
more of
open
that
up,
stretch?
I've tried it
Yeah,
before,
I've
and
seen it.
it's
I've
not the
seen some
most
people do it.
comfortable.
I think it's kind of sketch, to be honest.
I mean, like I've seen it before, but I think if you just focus on leaning into it a little bit and really just trying to
Yeah,
open up at the chest and arch the back, then you're fine. I don't think you need to put a
yeah,
foam roller back there, because it's the same with like a
yeah.
press. Like I tell people all the time, and
I think it overcomplicates it a little bit,
yeah, if you just think
personally.
about just keeping the chest as open as possible on the eccentric, so whether that be again
Yeah.
like on a press and I'm trying to keep my chest high and let myself open up as much here as possible, or on a
Mhm.
fly, let myself open up as much there possible. I don't think that I
Mhm.
need the foam roller unless I'm somebody that's just so tight and so rounded or something that is just so hard for me, and that actually helps me open up. I don't
Mhm.
see the point in doing it. I mean, it might help some people. I just tried it before, and I'm like, this shit ain't comfortable, bro. I'm not doing it.
No, no, no,
Like it's
man.
just not comfortable.
I just find too that it's too easy to shrug my shoulders up when I do it too.
Yeah, I
So
don't
I just
know.
don't. I don't know. I think that's the thing that I would say with the chest fly is you want to focus very hard on developing your stability first. That movement is not one of those things that you want to rush. Um, I will say, lately I've been doing some dumbbell flies, and those are underrated. I definitely
Really?
love dumbbell
See,
flies. Yeah,
personally, and the dumbbell flies are okay. I just am not the hugest fan. Like if I had to choose, I'd much rather
I just
do
found
pec
though that
deck or
it's
cable fly.
yeah. What I've also seen though too is it's just kind of like a coordination thing where like I feel good with dumbbells
Mm.
when I train that often, and I've also seen that like it's not really that important that you load it super heavy. Like I like that there's just like that freedom of the range of motion, and you can do it with a pretty light weight and still see, And then I find that sometimes that is what can teach me how to move better going into something like a machine fly. I do think that machine flies are probably the first place to start because I find that I can just rep 15 to 20 reps out pretty solid on a chest fly. Yeah. What do you think about the reps on that? I mean, like I feel like, you know, we know that reps like muscles grow in a rep range between 5 and 30 reps. What do you think about chest flies? Like, do you think that I mean, obviously, what do you think for like a more intermediate to advanced person? Do you think that they should stick to a lower rep range with chest flies, or like do you think it's more important to experiment with varying your rep ranges over time with those chest flies? What do you think?
I mean, unless you're just the only low range stuff you should do for chest flies, in my opinion, is
Hmm.
really, really slow eccentrics. Like
Hmm.
a heavy enough weight where it's gonna challenge you. But then you can just really load up the eccentric more than anything. Cause if you're trying to do like an actual set of like maybe five or something like that, like a heavy set of five for flies, it's just like I just feel like the risk of injury to I don't know, stimulus trade-off or
The
whatever you want to call
reward,
it, it's
yeah.
just not really there. Yeah, risk to reward ratio is not really there. But I mean, if you stick anywhere between 8 to 12, even aiming for somewhere around 10, again, still really controlling the eccentric and loading that up. Because like you said, I think that's really important, even just for keeping the tension on the muscle throughout the entire set. Dang,
Hmm.
around here some, but I think that's probably the best range. I mean, what do you think? Would you agree with that? Do you think
Yeah, I
lower,
would
higher?
I would
What?
have to I'd have to agree. I would say with that one, it's just really important to build mind muscle connection more than anything else. And in my mind, if you want to get better at something, you probably want to stick to doing something that you can groove into. And
Mm-hmm.
like you need a few more reps, I feel like, to really groove into something. I do think though that there's also merit to just training 6 to 8 reps, like staying in that rep range. And
Mm-hmm.
like obviously I think exposing yourself at first to 3 sets of 10 to 12 is good, but I think also that's something that most people get stuck in thinking, "Oh, I got to do 3 sets of 12 every
Mm-hmm.
single time I do this movement if I want
Mm-hmm.
to stimulate as much as possible," which is not always the case.
I think, yeah.
Um, and and the fatigue can build up too. Like that's
Mhm.
one thing I've noticed is like it's not the easiest movement on your shoulder you know. So you do want to think about like how your management of how of your total load, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So sometimes I find 3 sets of 6 to 8 reps. If I've gotten good at doing sets of 10 to 12 and 12 to 15
Mhm.
reps, I sometimes find that for 6 to 8 is nice because then I don't have you know, as many reps to worry about. I can just focus on getting a good, like quality over quantity
Yeah,
can
really good
can
hard
have its
setting.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think even
and
like beyond that, if whether well, I mean, you could do the 6 to 8 if that, works with you. I think either even adding in if you want more volume, like some cluster sets, some drop sets or something like that, some pause go sets, you can do that. But I think the most important thing still is just switching up. Like if you've been on a rep range of 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 12 for the past 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 20 weeks, I don't know, whatever, however long you do it because you're just like stubborn, maybe a
well,
year. I
some
mean, who
people look
knows?
at that as the
Use your pro-
go-to movement for chess because it is.
well,
You
I'm
know.
saying at that point, once you're doing it, that rep range that long, I mean, the biggest thing you need to do probably just change the rep ranges you're doing. Maybe even change the
Yep.
set. So instead of doing 3 sets, maybe just do two. Maybe do four. Maybe instead of doing 6 to 8, you do 10 to 15 or 15 to
Hmm.
20. Or maybe since you were doing 15 to 20, maybe you drop it down to heavy sets and heavy clusters of five, like 2 or 3 clusters of
Yeah.
five with like
When I
15.
was first starting out at 15 to 20, I was doing chest flies 15 to 20, definitely seeing great growth for sure. But I think also I was just a novice. So, I was responding really well to whatever was being thrown at me. But in these days, when I do chest flies, yeah, like I don't really be going above. That's a lie. I definitely go to sets of 12 to 15. But I found that like even just a good set of 8 for like most things, I feel like there's a lot of research supporting, you know, sets below 10 uh, for a lot of things, honestly. Because I just think like what's also really important, I think, chest is something that can be like people can overdo for sure because like it can be fun for a lot of people to train. You just want to like prioritize recovery as much as possible because that's really how you're going to grow your chest more than anything else is, some people are going to tell you like you got to train so hard, you got to train bench a lot. Like you got to bench 4 times a week.
Hmm.
You've probably heard that before. What do you think about that? What do you think about if somebody was trying to grow their bench or trying to grow their chest? What type of frequency are you thinking is going to be most optimal for that?
I mean, trying to grow your bench and trying to grow your chest is two different things. So if you're just trying to grow your
Exactly.
bench and you're trying to get stronger, then yeah, I would say at least twice a week. Maybe 3 times a week. I would probably say no more than
Mm-hmm.
3 times a week because at that point, I mean, that means you're training chest back to back on some weeks. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like back to back days, and that doesn't really make sense. I say at least a day in
Right.
between. So I say 3 days max if you're going to train, try to grow your bench. But if you're trying to grow your chest, I don't think that bench is the only thing you need to do. I think put in bench once a weekend so that you can
Mm-hmm.
progressively get stronger at that each week is something that'll be beneficial to you. And some variation of bench. So that's when it comes down to programming. So it's like, okay, when I train chest, I know I want one press movement, like a compound movement, where I'm going to get a little bit of shoulder adduction and elbow extension, right? So I want some type of
Mm-hmm.
compound movement where I can do like a press, but then also one where I'm just isolating shoulder reduction, like a flyer or pec deck or something like that, right? So that's what I think about at least when I'm thinking about my programming, just to stay well rounded. And then you think about the angles on the chest as well. Do I need to work a little bit more on upper chest, mid, lower,
Mm-hmm.
whatever? And I think even doing, stuff like decline flies and, lower chest specific stuff matters just for that roundness you get to the
Mm-hmm.
chest too. So I think that has some merit as well. I just think, again, it's about prioritizing, like you said earlier, but what areas, just like the front delt versus the lateral and rear delt, that's usually
Mm-hmm.
over, trained just because you're training your front delt in every single shoulder press or chest press that you do. So, that's just something you got to think about in terms of programming. Okay, maybe I don't need to do as many front raises or as I do
Well,
rear delt raises. Same thing with
yeah.
the incline presses versus decline presses.
Yes. Well, and I think this is another thing too that I want to address about bench pressing. I think that yes, like there are a lot of people that will die on that hill, like bench press. You gotta bench as much as possible. But honestly, I see a lot of dudes walking around with cap delts like this, and then they got nothing back here.
Nothing back there,
You know
yeah.
what I'm saying?
And it's probably because they
That like
bench
there's
all
a
the
lot of
time.
they got all these like there's so much benching being done, and then
Hmm.
you think about bench, how much it stimulates your anterior delt, and then you're hitting shoulder presses, and then you're hitting lateral raises, and then you're hitting some medial
Your
stuff.
front delts. I
But
mean, I'm just the
for
front
the
delt
most
gets
part, it's
hit
all
so
front
much.
delts.
Yeah, even some
They get
tricep
fried.
movements like dips or
Yeah,
something, you hit your front delt. So there's like no
yeah.
way to get around it. So I tell people all the time, dude, double up, triple up on your rear delt movements. Like
Mm-hmm.
just do it, and I promise you, it'll make a difference. Like,
Yes, like
dude,
hit
it
it
gives
on
you so
back
much,
day. I
dude.
would hit it. I would even hit it on my front delt day. I would hit rear delts first
Dude, I
on
don't
my
even
front delt
train.
day.
I'm like super. I don't even train rear delts. Literally, I'll train rear delts maybe once a month in terms of like actually adding them into my programming. Maybe once a month because I know that I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to add in a press movement basically every single workout, whether it be shoulder press or chest press. And I know that I'm going to hit some type of rear delt or front delt and also some of my tricep movements. So I don't even program it. Most of the time when I hit shoulders and I want to hit delts, lateral and rear. That's it. Lateral and rear.
Yeah.
I really don't try to
Yeah.
isolate.
Yeah, dude. I have found that like especially for building like size on the delts, you would think it actually would be based off of like a heavy pressing movement, but I've
Mhm.
actually experienced that lateral raises really are what I take the cake. I think that
I think
lateral
lateral
raises
raises
are
help with the shape a lot more.
yeah,
That's what I
yeah,
found, at least like that kind of round shape that you get that
yes.
makes that cap.
I think
I
that's
think
what a lot of people are searching for
I
too,
think that I
like
don't know, man, because I've been doing a lot of presses recently. I don't I,
mm,
my shoulder just feel a little bit more dense, I would say, when I do
mm,
presses. I think I get a lot of blood in the obviously lateral raise, you get a ton of blood in there. I mean, you do a good bit of
yes.
damage, but I think with the presses, just because you can go so heavy and you go way
Mm-hmm.
heavier than hitting, delt movements like a fly or a rear delt fly, or whatever. Like you can load it up the most. Obviously, it's still, probably the most humbling exercise. You can't load it up that damn
Yes.
much, unless you're a freak, but still,
Yeah.
it's something you can load up more than doing like some of the flies. So I don't know. For
Yes.
me personally, I
Well,
usually don't like to add presses in, but recently I have been.
I think it's important that we discuss that the fact that there does have to be some rear delt work. I think that what happens is because there is nuance with these movements, so it's like, oh yeah, like I don't need to train delts because like I already hit them when I bench and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, true. Say you could make the same argument for the rear delts if you're hitting back because if you're doing some back movements inevitably like a row or some of some kind, yeah, you'll stimulate some rear delts there.
Hmm.
But I've found that when I really try hard to isolate my rear delts, I've seen better progress. I've seen better physique improvements. So if you're thinking about physique and aesthetics and things like that, and you just feel like, oh man, I want to see that visual change. Like I want to feel like I look like I go to the gym. I found that the rear delts, like when you really just isolate them and put them through some stress instead of just thinking like, oh, I'm going to stimulate them some with, I'll do some face pulls at the end of my back day, and that'll be good. Like, no, like John Meadows actually has said this before. It's like train your delts first, put them
Yeah.
first. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So
Well,
I think that
no, go ahead. Go ahead. I thought you was done. Go
no, no,
ahead.
no, you don't know. No, I want to hear what you
Well, I
got to
just
say.
want to
What you
ask you a
got?
question.
Uh
Because I
huh.
know for me, I think as easy and simple as it seems, like delt movements, a lot of times I have to like really not overcoach, but I have to just be very deliberate
Hmm.
and how I want them to be executed. Because a lot of times you see too much traps being used, even on like on real delt on lateral raise, excuse me, even real delt
Hmm.
flies. You see the same thing. A lot of traps being used, or
Yep.
people just tensing up too much. How do you coach somebody if it's their first session, first time, or at least first time them doing lateral raises with you? How are you telling them, what cues are you giving them to do and execute lateral raises or real delt flies the same way, or at least in a
Well, one
proper
of
way?
the things, well, here's what I would say. When I was younger, when I was first starting coaching, yes, I was big on just giving people straight up like, oh, we're gonna do the straight up lateral raise. But these days, if I really want somebody to feel the muscle that's working, I do it chest supported. So like I had just have them stand up against a very, very still very somewhat upright bench, and
Mm-hmm.
you're just lean forward. And what that does is it all like that lean forward, like that tilt is what I would have told people, when we were doing just regular standing lateral raises, because like I experienced the same thing, traps, and a lot of people using momentum, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the thing is like that's what kills the gains on lateral raises is like using swinging the weight, and also their hands going up above their elbows,
Mm-hmm.
right? But like
The
as
hands
soon
above the
as you,
elbows is like the worst,
oh my
bro.
God, every time I
Yeah.
see that, I'm just like, oh,
Yeah.
but
Because
like
it's so bad for the shoulder. It impinges the shoulder immediately
yeah,
once you
no,
get above like this height, or even about this height. So what you got to do there is you got to basically externally or internally rotate so that you can get those elbows higher than the hands. That's what you really want. So that's why I usually tell
yeah,
people internally rotate enough to where the pinky is kind of leading up a little bit. But then outside
mhm,
of that, I'm not even focused on getting the weight up. All I'm doing is I'm trying to get the weight as far away from me essentially as possible. And
mhm,
since the shoulder, or at least the dumbbell that's attached to the arm, is on a socket, it's gonna move
yeah.
up. So if I just think about
Yeah.
getting it as wide as possible, and again, where to put the pressure, so I'm thinking about putting the pressure on the outside of my hand as I
Yeah.
go
I
out,
think
dude. That's if you make it simpler, most times you'll engage the muscle more. It's when people start doing
yes.
way too much when you lose it.
That's why I think doing the chest supported just makes it simpler
And
because
I've done that as well. Yeah.
it takes so much of the momentum away and it forces you to really use the muscle. It keeps you honest about what you can really move.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the really important part is like sometimes people are just picking up weights they have no business picking up, and
Especially on
swinging the weight
lateral raises.
around. Lateral raises, I see it all the time. If you go to any commercial gym, go to any like go to a Planet Fitness,
Yeah. And
you'll
and
see
I,
it.
I'm not even against going heavy on lateral raises. That's the thing. But you have
Me
to learn how
neither.
to do regular lateral raises really controlled first. Because
Hmm.
otherwise, then your regular lateral raises, when you go back to being more isolated or strict with a lighter weight, they're just going to be messed up. So it's like, I'm like,
Yes.
nah, you got to master this first. And then once we get there, then
Eccentrics.
we can do the more bent elbow one where I'm just trying to, basically get that shoulder high from the outside,
Hmm.
and maybe we can load it up a little bit more. But there's variations of everything, but I'm curious if you've tried
Yes.
even like with kettlebells lateral raises, because the weight
See, I
distribution on
have.
kettlebells is a little bit different than dumbbells.
I was gonna say no, I haven't, but I could definitely tell you that that stimulus probably feels pretty good
Yeah,
because of
because
the way that
especially at the top,
that
since the
weight
weight's
is like it's
all at the
hanging.
bottom. Yeah,
Yeah.
at the top it feels a little bit like almost not like a band exactly, but you just feel that weight
Hmm.
differently at the top. Is what I'll say.
Yes. Well,
So.
and another thing I think is really important is to, think about what makes muscles grow, the eccentric. Like mentioned it a bunch of times, we'll probably end up mentioning it a bunch more. The research really supports eccentric control, and I think with lateral raises, that's actually the key.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think I find even with a freaking 5 pound dumbbell, I can make myself burn if I
Mm-hmm.
really do it right. And
Mm-hmm.
like that's the key thing is like finding that level of control on the way down and just progressively overloading that.
Mm-hmm.
Like thinking in terms of progressive overload with that. If you can control it on the way down, that's a good standard of movement. And, also another thing that I found is that, like figuring out that Y raise. Y raise is kind of similar. It's kind of not fully a front raise, not fully a lateral raise,
Yeah, it's
but I
kind of
think
in the
that you can
middle.
really Yeah, and I think that there's actually a lot of nuance there with like what angle might hit
Mhm.
you might feel the best, because
Mhm.
I found too, if I go two out like this, boom, you see I scrunch my shoulders up like that. But
Mhm.
when I go into kind of more of a Y raise, I'm going out towards the corner of the room, I can definitely keep my traps in a much more stable
Yeah.
position. So I've kind of started coaching. I started coaching the lateral raise a lot more like a Y raise almost than
Mhm.
rather than just like a out. And I found that to be especially effective when I'm coaching cable laterals, which are really honestly a more of an advanced movement. Like, what was your experience with cable laterals going, cable lateral raises when you first started with them?
I mean, they're obviously different in terms of how you have to execute the movement, because of the
Mm-hmm.
weight distribution and everything, and how the weight is
Mm-hmm.
technically pulling you back down at an angle. But it's like like what you said, like when you do them the right way, and if you're able to, again, I feel like that's one of the ones where I need to see you do the dumbbells right first, because the
Mm-hmm.
cables, for one, like you increase the
Absolutely.
weight on a cable fly, and it's like
Yep.
night and day, dude. Like even just 5 pound difference, you might have went all the way up. Then you increase 5 pounds, you're like, oh, like damn, I
Yes,
probably need to go back
dude.
down. So if I can see you really know how to control the weight on the dumbbells, then we can go over to cables, because a lot of times you'll see people go right back to this and just shrugging up. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, unless you can make a fully controlled, motion all the way up without raising this and relaxing everything else, then we probably need to do something else. So,
Do
but I
you
mean,
feel like, but like at what point do you feel like someone's ready? Because like, do you think like what I've experienced with, showing people this is even when I get people doing lateral raises like pretty frequently, we go over to this cable lateral, we go over to the cable, for some reason it's just like a whole new thing, you
mm-hmm,
know, um, because it's much harder to like keep your arm in a stiff position too. Um, and like, but I've noticed that like coaching that eccentric, it clicks for them a little bit more.
mm-hmm. Because you
Like
have that
there's a
gradual
feeling,
pulling, yeah.
yeah. And I found though that it's hard to get anywhere above 8 to 10 reps, really. So like that's one of those ones that I'm actually totally okay with giving people 6 to 8 reps,
Oh
and
yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
they seem to get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Cool. Let's I think we're probably getting close to time here. Let's talk about last thing, I guess, before, because I know we touched on shoulder pressing.
yep.
But what are some shoulder pressing cues that, again, you think are universal? I don't know. You might have some, you might not have any, but what do you think, real quick?
Universal. Universal cues. Well, I would say one of the biggest ones is I see this too often, like the wrists being in this position, just stacking those wrists,
Mm-hmm.
getting those forearms vertical. When you
Mm-hmm.
get those forearms vertical, it's gonna take you away from a lot of shoulder pressing problems. It's gonna help you develop better stability.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another thing too with shoulder pressing I found is actually breath. I've said breath before, but I think it's really important to brace your core and get that intra-abdominal pressure because you're really compressing your spine, pressing something up over your head. So I found that it's really important to just keep this tense because when you learn to strengthen this actually can be the foundation that helps you build up in weight, being able to eventually push a little bit more load.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons I love using a movement like the Z press, where your feet are on the floor in front of you, and you are just having to sit there and hold yourself up basically with your core while you press the weight up. I've just found that to be super beneficial for helping people develop more stability on the press and when the breathing is down, when we get the breathing down, then we go back over to just a regular seated dumbbell press, and we've gotten to potentiate some of those gains on the shoulder press. So I would say the elbows stacked, or wrist stacked over the elbows, forearms or whatever. Breath is important, and this one is also like I said this on the chest pressing before too, but keeping those elbows tucked in. I think for this in particular, I find when you flare them back like this, it's easy to get a lot of lat involvement, even some upper chest involvement when you flare your elbows back too much. You see, you can kind of almost see
Mm-hmm.
there's a
I
stretch in
just feel like it's
the
not as
upper
stable
chest
either.
there. Exactly. So that's one of those times where I
Yeah.
actually am
Come in just
very
a little
much
bit and just make sure
I'm
the
very much
joints are
about
stacked.
and also getting the another cue dumbbell in line with that delts. And I've also found too that you know, you don't necessarily have to go all the way down here, all the way down to your ears. I find it, or down to your shoulders. There's this guy that I get into arguments with all the time. He's like, "You got to touch the dumbbells to your shoulders. Got to get full range of motion." I'm like, this is one of the few times where it's actually okay. The risk to reward ratio of like, I don't want to strain my shoulders with a
Yeah.
heavy ass
I think it
weight.
just depends how heavy you go. If you're going light enough for you to be able to go as deep as you can to be able to make that, pain free and everything, then okay, fine. But if you feel a pinch, then probably just shorten it just a little bit at the bottom. I'm even a proponent of not even locking out all the way at the top, even on like dumbbell
Mm-hmm.
bench press sometimes, but especially with dumbbells, just because if you lock all the way at the top, now I'm losing a little bit of that shoulder being engaged from being out here. And now my joints are not
Mm-hmm.
stacked because I'm all the way up. So I'll usually stop about here. So again, my elbow and my wrist is still stacked. Same thing with my bench press. Instead of me going all the way out, where now my elbow is going to be wider than my or my wrist is going to be wider than my elbow. I'll
Mm-hmm.
stop here, like maybe like 90% of the range of motion, basically, just to keep that tension on the chest a little bit too, or on the shoulders
Mm,
too. So,
interesting.
but yeah, that's a little extra, little bit too. But yeah, I think I like all those. I think again, as long as you're keeping the joint stacked, and as long as you feel stable. So even sometimes arching that back just a little bit, keeping that chest kind of
Mm-hmm.
high. On the shoulder press, you see a lot of guys in World's Strongest Man, or even in like power lifters when they do their shoulder presses and stuff. You see them really start to arch back a lot, and it's because
Mm-hmm.
you just can use the upper back a little bit more to press a little bit more. So if you're trying to isolate the shoulder for a shoulder press, then probably maybe a little less arch. But again, if you're just
Yeah.
going for strength gains and you're trying to
But
just
if
grow
you're
the
a
shoulders in
log
general,
presser,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, you're trying to get everything involved. But again, that's the
Uh-huh.
nuance between different types of training. But yeah, man. Well, shoot, that was I think that was a good episode, man. Talking about
Yeah,
we
dude.
talked about a little bit more than I thought we were. Not just
Uh,
cues. We
uh,
talked about some rep ranges, some intensity, some things that work well with us, and even just exercise selection. So, cool, man. Well, you
yeah,
got
man.
it? Anything you want to add to the chest or shoulders before we wrap up?
One thing I will say, I say, okay, here's the number one thing I would say, to focus on if you guys really want to see, um, you know, like better gains over the course of time is, train those secondary muscles too. Like train your triceps hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because I found that if you really want to gain better feel with certain loads on presses, your triceps not fatiguing as much makes a big difference. I have found. So training triceps, I would definitely recommend putting some more emphasis on trying to make your arms look bigger. There's a lot of things about training triceps. We love
Yeah.
tries. But that's the only thing I would say. And like, you compare tries with this day. I would also say, just dedicating some time to working on your arms, which are like, are they're secondary movers for like a lot of your things, like your pulls, your pushes, like, whenever you're doing pull-ups, like having some stronger biceps or like and grip strength, like those grip extensor muscles being trained definitely has a lot of feel impact. And I think that's like a lot of what training is for most people is, oh, this feels good today, like I think I'm going to push hard,
Mm-hmm.
or oh, this isn't feeling too great today, I think I'm just going to just try to get as many good quality reps as I can and not worry about increasing the load today or whatever. So but I think that you can minimize that more the more you train these secondary muscles. So but that's the only thing I would really add, other than all the plethora of things that we have discussed today.
Yeah, we definitely
But
discuss a lot. I would say, yeah, another thing, just when we're in this again, we talked about, um, controlling the eccentric. I would just say, just in
mm-hmm,
general, don't rush the set. Even if the set feels like
mm-hmm,
it's getting tough, and the reps are getting real, tough, the pain, tolerance is getting a little low, lactate's building up. Just don't rush it. Try
mm-hmm,
to stay in it as long as you can, and just be
yep,
disciplined with the way that you execute the reps, because that, along with obviously understanding doing the technique correctly, it does matter. It's kind of a little bit of both. So you got to have a little bit of mental resilience there to just stay in it, but then enough
yes,
discipline to not change those reps just because they're getting more difficult.
exactly. Well, I think that Mike Israetel says it best. Like precision is key. Like you got to train with precision. The more precise you can be from session to session, that way you can measure those results and see those goals happen in real time and really feel like you're in that training process. Like
Yeah,
you can look forward to training,
and I think even just like personally, if you just consistently keep like giving your best and training as hard as you can, essentially, not as hard as you can stupidly, but as hard as you can, at least to the point where, when you get to the end of the set, you can push past maybe a further mental barrier than you were the last time. As long as you're giving yourself the
Mm-hmm.
best every time, you're going to end up making improvements, even in terms of being more efficient at recruiting certain
Yes.
muscle fibers or just feeling the movement more, grooving a little bit more with it. Again, just getting stronger in general. Like these are things that
Mm-hmm.
maybe not
I
everybody thinks about, but it
mm-hmm.
matters over time and being consistent with those things.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing is like, you know, I have thought about some things recently with in terms of like how do I think about training? Like I want to see progress, I want to recover, I want to feel good, I want to feel like I'm doing my best. So what are those like how do I really prioritize those things? And I would say like the main thing is like you were saying, I think one of the biggest things is like that you just push yourself every time. And it's not necessarily that you're doing it. Like it may be a physical thing that you are doing to push yourself, but really what you're saying is that I'm pushing myself mentally every single time in
Mm-hmm.
some aspects. Either it's like I'm getting one more rep of chest. Maybe I'm just getting a little bit more like time under tension. Like I've controlled the eccentric better than I did last time, or just getting maybe I did another set or I top set it up with a heavier weight this time, and I'm going to try to stick with a higher weight for more of the sets. You know, you just find something to do to stoke the flame of always doing your best every single time.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you do that, like that's that reward system for your brain that's going to just help you feel like you're getting the most out of your training,
Yeah,
and that everybody deserves that.
yeah, I think I want to talk about that actually next week for our video next week. Is I think just mindset in the gym. I guess approaching the gym as well, like before you even get in there. But I think just knowing the right way to think about being in the set, getting to that point towards the end of the set where you're really reaching failure, if that's what you're going for, or even things
Mm-hmm.
to think about how to be actually aware and be very conscious and deliberate about the things that you do in the set, things to be thinking about, whether it be technically or biomechanically, or even just the mindset of, okay, I got to get somewhere mentally to make sure I can, push through this set and maybe reach a PR if that's what you're going for, or at least
Yeah,
again just to be able to continuously train hard without burning yourself out mentally. Knowing how
yeah,
to
dude.
find that balance is probably another piece that I think that I
I
had to
think
I
that's
think.
Dude, I was just gonna say, dude, that's a really great point. I think we should talk about that next week, like, because that's something that I've learned. Like, it's not always science that's going to be able to tell you that,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not science that's going to be able to tell you, hey, this is what's going to motivate you to train. Like this is like what's fun for you to train. Oh, this is the rep range that's going to help you grow. Everybody's a little different. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we'll definitely have to talk about that next week,
Yeah,
dude.
yeah.
Um,
That
one thing I will say, guys, is, also eat your damn protein.
eat
Just
your
eat your
damn
damn
protein.
protein.
It's not
Seriously,
hard.
like
I mean,
it's
all you gotta do is just eat your protein.
you
I
got to
mean,
figure out what it is. You got to figure out what it is you like to eat protein wise, and you got to eat that
yeah,
shit
you gotta
and
eat
do
it.
it on a regular basis. And do it as often as you can. In a sustainable fashion, and you will see chest gains for days, baby. You'll have these double DD knockers. Okay, we're gonna be milking by the end of all of this fitness journey, baby. All right, boys.
Oh man,
Yeah,
you funny as hell. All right, hey, we done. We're gonna end it right there.
yeah,
All
we
right, man. I'll
done.
see you
I'm
next week.
I'm done.
All
All right, boys. See you later,
right,
man. Have a good one.
you too, man.